All right. Well, thanks so much for being here. It is truly a pleasure to share the stage with the one, the only, Karen Treiger. So our paths first crossed through Mood, Seattle, of which we were founding volunteers, board members. And it just has been a pleasure as you have embarked on this author's journey to watch from book 1 to now book 2. Congratulations, Mazel Tov.
Thank you. Oh, there we go. Hi, everybody. And I never really like using a microphone because my voice is usually quite loud, but I understand I'll wave to all the people at home. I'm hoping that my mom is able to be on. Hi, Mom, and my Aunt Jackie. Hi, Jackie. There's none of the tech people here. I'm not going to look up at the cameras. That's just too awkward. We have a nice group here, and we're going to have a good conversation and have some fun today. I'm going to stand over here. Can you guys see the pictures? Is that okay? Can you guys see? All right. All right. It's funny because I feel like this microphone doesn't actually amplify my voice, does it? Oh, okay, good. Perfect. All right. Well, the reason we're going to have some fun is because when I delved into this story, I knew that my mom's family was obviously very involved in Temple, but I really understand it on a whole new level now that I've done all the research and found all the fun things and fun stories and fun facts about what their involvement and what Temple was and is, not so much today, but was in their day. So, but I want to just start by saying thank you. Kate went out to, I think, see if she's directing people here, but thank you to Temple and to Kate, who we've known each other now for quite a long time, for inviting me here and allowing me to be in this space, because it's actually very emotional to be here in the place where my family, my mom's family was, and it was such a big, big part of their life. And this is the building. In the old days, it was called the Temple Center. Now they call it the Annex, or I think that's what it's called. And but when the Temple Center was built, this was the center of their social life. And so to be here in the place that was the center of my family's religious and social life is really very moving. And to realize that my heritage is a big part of what happened here. And it's just it's very emotional. But my impetus I wanted to share with you before I really get into some of the story, and what I'm going to do is I hope, unless I get carried away with stories, I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes. Feel free to ask questions in the middle. But at the end, I hope that we can have a conversation about the history of Seattle, the history of Temple, the history of our families here in Seattle. So, but the impetus for really... Okay. Oh my gosh, so maybe I should just... It's streaming. Here's Kate. That's a question for Kate. Will they be able to watch it on the Temple website afterwards?
On our Facebook page is where the recording will live. Sorry for the interruption.
No, it's okay.
A little bit of a rival challenge, but I think the gang...
Okay, good.
You get questions.
Yes.
They won't hear. So you'll have to
I can repeat. I'm good at repeating questions. Yes, absolutely. I'll just repeat the question. It's easier. But if there is a question in the middle, please feel free to interrupt me, raise your hand, and because we're a small group, and the people I think online, I don't know, do they have the opportunity to ask questions, or? Okay, through text, ask questions from Rabbi Kate. And Kate, while you were gone, I thanked you and Temple for welcoming me here and I just said that it's a very emotional experience to be here in this building where my family had so much of their lives was here. And it's really chill, like a little chills up my spine. But so my goal is to talk for about 45 minutes, and feel free to interrupt me, like I said, and then have time to discuss questions, comments, and ideas that revolve around researching your own family histories and what that looks like in Seattle, what it looks like in New York, what it looks like in Tel Aviv, like where you live and where your family history is you can research it no matter where you are, or no matter where it comes from. But to share with you, the impetus for writing this book really came when my dad, who many of you in the room knew, died in 2013, Erwin Treiger. He was obviously a very larger-than-life figure here in Seattle, certainly in my life, obviously as my father, but was an attorney in Seattle, a civic leader, and certainly a leader in Seattle's Jewish community. And when he died, he had hoped to write our family history, a book, like what I did, but he died before he had the opportunity to do it. So I felt like, okay, let's do this together, Dad, because he started the project by collecting over all these years things, articles and pictures and photos and speeches and just a plethora of things. And so that's where I started, this old dusty file that was in the back room of their condo. You know, you had to dig it out, but there it was, and that's what I started with. And that got me going on a journey. And during my journey, I will say, this is a cute picture. This doesn't show the thing, but that's my dad as a baby. Dad was born in 1934 here in Seattle. And he loved baseball, so that was the Mariner Moose. But yeah, so I I had my dad sitting with me as I did the project. Yes?
Was he I remember, I grew up in Mercer Island, I saw the name, it showed, I think, when he lived in Mercer Island, I could be wrong.
Yes.
Was he like the attorney for the Mariners? Did he do like sports attorney?
Well, he mostly was a business and tax attorney, but he was the attorney for the Mariners for their first 16 years. So baseball was a big deal in our household, definitely. Yeah, but it was actually really a beautiful experience for me because, you know, one of the things that if you're alive for any length of time on this planet, we experience grief. And in that grief, everyone deals with it differently, but it's just a hard thing. And working on this book and kind of holding my dad's hand as I was going through the whole thing really helped me a lot with my own processing of the loss of my father. So that was really the impetus for doing the book, but it turned into its own journey of introspection on my part and like a big question about like, okay, so I have all this history and I have all these values and things that I've learned about now, and so how does that make me? And I had this, I don't know, maybe everybody goes through this at some point, but I'm like, wow, so many things had to happen to have me be born in 1961 in Seattle, Washington. Like, that's crazy. So just all these different things that, you know, it's been a great journey, and now talking about it is really fun. So what I did was I researched all 5 families that ended up making me. But today, we're going to focus on 3. The 3 that were a big, big part of this place, Temple de Hirsch. And that is, this doesn't work, but in the middle is Victor Stataker. On the bottom left is Paul Singerman, who was a founding member of Temple. And on the top left are the Friedlanders. And those 3 families were really very integral in Temple's history and in Temple's life. So I'm going to start with Paul. And Paul, for people who love history and love Seattle history, Paul's the most fun. It's the first chapter in the book because it really gives us the history of Seattle from the early, early stages. Paul arrived in Seattle in 1874, came in this wave of immigration that was young, primarily German or German-speaking, primarily men, who came to the United States between 1820 and 1880. They came by themselves. They came alone. Friedlanders came together. They were married in the old country, but most of these young men came alone. And I sat with this idea for a little bit. 18 years old, saying goodbye to your family, never seeing them again for most people. Paul did go back in the 19-teens and see his mother, but most of them did not. Yes?
Before the Holocaust, you know, when the Reformed Jews sort of blended into German society, I thought they were accepted very well there. They were accepted, and they were like, why would we leave when
Good question. So the question is, before the Holocaust, German society, Jews were accepted and integrated into society. So why would all of these young men leave? I thought the same question. And it wasn't all rosy and peaches. You know, there was still discrimination in Germany, certainly, even though the Jews had emancipation and citizenship. However, one of the things I learned explained a lot about that. There was a law, and this explains also the discrimination. There was a law passed in Germany at this time that said, for Jews, it doesn't matter how many children you have, how many sons you have, only one of your sons can get married. So if only one son in a family of 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, can get married, if I'm the mom, I'm feeling less sad that my son is leaving for the Golden Medina, the new land, because he'll be able to have a life there. So that really changed my view of why many of these young men came by themselves. So I don't know if that's the only reason, but to me, that was like, oh, that was like a little light bulb. Yes, of course. But when he came to Seattle, this is what it looked like. It was a pioneer town of a pioneer town. This is Pioneer Square in 1874. And it tells you a lot about Seattle. You can't see the sign here, but on the right side, there's a little sign there, and it says the Daily Post. That was Seattle's first newspaper, and that's their office. So that's kind of fun. And what Paul did was he first ended up in San Francisco in 1870. He ended up in New York, but then crossed the continent, San Francisco, and met in San Francisco. Remarkably, it was the city on the West Coast. There were 150,000 census-counted citizens. And when I say census-counted citizens, it's primarily white citizens, the settlers that came, obviously displacing many natives, and that just has to be said about all the cities in this whole country, but certainly along the West Coast, including Seattle. But there were 16,000 Jews in 1870 in San Francisco. So Paul arrived and met all these other young German, originally German Jews, and got to know them and partnered up with 2 other men, Ferdinand Toklas, who, yes, was the father of Alice B. Toklas, and another man named Hyman Orbach, who turns out became Paul's future brother-in-law. And then they said, hey, there's this little town up in Seattle. It's just starting. Why don't we try to see what we can do up there, open a store? And so he came up in 1874, and like a test market, and said, this is great, went back, and then they sent him up in 1876 to live here. And he settled here and had, over the course of his career, 11 mercantile stores. And in fact, he is known for starting what was Seattle's first department store. And it was first called, a general dry goods store, but then it grew and grew and grew and grew until he was very wealthy and had huge, huge stores. But I'll show you a couple of them. This was, sorry? So in the beginning, I don't know if you can see the sign, it was called the San Francisco store because it was based in San Francisco, and the merchandise came because Mr. Toklas was still in San Francisco, and he would send him up the merchandise up the coast. There were steamers that came up and down all the time, because Seattle, Portland, San Francisco were the 3 cities on the coast, on that, really on the coast. So this was store number 4. And the reason that I love to show this picture is because, let's see if I can go over here and point it out, because there's no laser thing here. This big building here was built in 1880, and it was called the Squire Opera House. And it was Seattle's first real theater. And it was described in the Seattle Times as just being gorgeous and just putting anything that Portland had to shame. And so, of course, it was a dig to Portland. But Paul had his retail store on the first floor of this beautiful, brand new building. This, just to give you some orientation about Seattle's history, of course, the centerpiece of Seattle for many years, and in the center of town, was Yesler's Sawmill. This here is part of Yesler's Sawmill, which goes from here down to the water, which is just a half a block that way. And this up here, with this little towery thing on top, was Seattle's Washington Territory's territorial university. And of course, it's on 4th and University. That is why university is called university. Downtown Seattle, this was downtown Seattle, and it continued on the other side of Yesler's mill, and people had to kind of go around it to get to the other half of what was then Seattle's business district. Well, we'll get into it, but after the fire, everything is burnt down, and same with Yesler's Mill, and the city council of Seattle evens out the road, calls it First Avenue, and that's the First Avenue we have today. It goes from south of Yesler, and there's a little curve right at Yesler, and then it keeps going. That little curve was eminent domained, I'm using that as a verb, from Yesler's property, and he was pissed as hell. He sued the city. It's a whole thing. It was great. Anyway, so I love this picture. This is store number 4. And then in 1879, Paul marries a woman named Jenny Orbach. And it was interesting because I never understood how they met. I'm like, how did he meet a Jewish woman in Seattle? Well, he didn't. Hyman Orbach, who I mentioned, was in San Francisco and one of his early business partners. Hyman says to Paul, why don't you marry my sister? She's in Germany. Why don't you pay for her to come over and marry her? And Paul says, get me a picture. So he gets a picture, and he says, okay, I'll marry her. And sadly, I found pictures of almost everybody that I was researching. I could not find a picture of Jenny, and I'm still so sad about it. But anyway, she came over. He paid for her transatlantic thing, and then transcontinental. The railroad was working by then. And she came over, and she took one look at him, short, balding Jewish man, and she was like, I'm not sure. But they got married because she, as my grandfather tells it, Jack Friedlander, she was embarrassed to go back home. And what was she going to do? Go back home and say, I didn't like the guy? So she married him. And they obviously made it work. I have no idea if there was actual love in their marriage or they just made it work, but they had 3 children, Isidore, and Louis, and then Belle, who was my grandmother. And one of the interesting things that I came to realize in the family research of this is, and the sort of like, how did I become me? Like, what a miracle that is, that I exist at all, is neither Isidore nor Louis had any children. So of Paul Singerman, our first ancestor, Belle was the only one who had children. And it's the only reason that I'm here, standing here today. So it's fascinating. So there you go. And I knew Belle. She was my great-grandmother. She lived until I was around, I'm not sure exactly when, I forget when she died, but I knew her as a kid, which was great. And this is his 6th store. Now, this man is doing well. This is the store that he built on First and Columbia. So the other side of Yesler's Mill. Fire hasn't happened yet. This is look at the year, 1888. The Seattle Times has this huge article about this building when it's being built, and they call it a mercantile palace. It was the first store in Seattle to have an elevator. He was the first one to have electric lights. He was the first one in Seattle to have a telephone. This guy was an innovator. So, watch out for Paul. But then, little did they know that after they opened this beautiful department store, actually, by then, it was called Toklas and Singerman, Orbach fell off. And I kept wondering, what the hell happened to Orbach? Like, if Paul married his sister, how is it that the company and the store ended up just being called Toklas and Singerman and Company instead of, where's Orbach, right? But then, in my research, late in my research, I've been wondering this the whole time, I found a note in the Seattle Times that had to do with a lawsuit that had been going on already for 15 years between Hyman Orbach and Ferdinand Toklas in San Francisco. And the reason it was in the Seattle Times is because Ferdinand, who was the winner of this lawsuit, was trying to get the money that Hyman owed him, and he was freezing his bank accounts up here and down there. And anyway, I'm like, oh, I see. There was a big fight. There was a lawsuit. Hyman was out. Don't know how Jenny felt about it, but that's clearly what happened. I mean, I'm assuming that was the nature of the breakup. But then a year later, what happened? The Great Seattle Fire burned everything down. This is what was left of that gorgeous mercantile palace. Just pause and think about that moment. My great-grandmother, Belle, described that day to my mom. And she told her that from on top of the hill, where they were living, that she saw the smoke filled the sky. This is a child describing this to then her grandchild, and that she saw the red flames jumping up into the air from downtown, and that it was very impactful for every single person who lived there. But obviously for the merchants whose store was burnt down. But Paul was nothing if not resilient. They opened up a temporary store up on 3rd and Madison, and 1 year later, exactly to the day, June 6th, 1 year later, they opened the store at 3:10 p.m., grand opening, which is exactly the time that the flames of the fire hit Toklas and Singerman building. So they opened a brand new store 1 year later, exactly the day and time that the fire happened. And I don't have a picture of that here, but that's just crazy. So I want to pause and just talk for a minute about Seattle's early Jewish life. And so in 1874, when Paul arrives, there's approximately 1,500 white settlers. And again, this is not including the natives who were here and certainly were displaced as Seattle grew. There were 50 Jews. So Paul was one of the first 50 Jews to show up in Seattle. That's crazy. And Seattle's population grew. By 1880, you can see 3,500 people with 100 Jews. The very first synagogue that was built in Seattle or opened in Seattle was 1889. It was called Ohevet Shalom. And it was just all the Jews that were here. It was people who were more observant and less observant. It was a mishmash of traditions and trying a compromise of how they might have their synagogue. And that was their very first synagogue. And but in 1891, as more people are coming, the Orthodox group among them didn't want to have mixed seating anymore. It was a mixed seating thing. So they started their own synagogue, and that was called Chevra Bikur Cholim. Now, Paul, and I assume and Jenny, were founding members of Ohevet Shalom, and were founding members of Bikur Cholim, because he came from a much more observant home back in the old country, which today where he's from is, if you can visualize Poland, the northeast corner of Poland, kind of near the border of Lithuania. That's where his little town was from. But he was also a founding member, they were founding members of Temple de Hirsch. And what happened here is Ohevet Shalom shut down. It couldn't make it because in 1893 there was a huge depression all over the country. I assume that's why they didn't make it. And it just collapsed and they couldn't manage their finances. But in the meantime, they had built a huge synagogue. They built this on 8th and Seneca. It was ready, it had 800 seats in it, even though they only had 250 members. So they were anticipating a growth, but they didn't make it, and that shut down. I have no idea when. Someone asked me, when was this building torn down? Think of 8th and Seneca. This is not there anymore. And I don't know the answer. I should just look it up, but I don't know. But this building, once I also did the research on Temple, and this looks, I think I have a picture, coming up here, Temple. One second, I don't want to jump to it, but look how similar that building is. Very similar to the Ohevet Shalom building. This is Temple's first building, but I'm jumping ahead. So Temple was founded in 1889. And again, Paul and Jenny were founding members. So I feel a little, not quite as accomplished as my ancestor. I only founded one synagogue in Seattle. He founded 3. So there you go. But Belle, who I mentioned, my great-grandmother, Belle Singerman, was in Temple's first confirmation class. And the woman in the middle row with the dark hair, kind of curly-ish, that's Belle. And that's here, well, not in this building. This building didn't exist. There was no building at that time. I don't even know where they met, where the Temple met. But she was in the very first confirmation class. So whether Paul felt tugged towards Bikur Cholim or tugged towards Temple, they clearly landed here in their religious and social life. And I love this picture because look at the rabbi there is named Rabbi Joseph. And just look at how they're dressed and what their styles are. And you can see that this group of German Jews, these children of the German Jews who landed in Seattle in this first wave, they were successful. These are beautiful clothes and well-dressed people. And so they were doing really well. And think about Paul's department store that burned down, then they rebuilt it. They were doing very well. This is Temple's first building that was built in 1908, here on this property, right here where we are right now. And this is the temple center. It's that's the temple itself, and then that building there, that's the building that we're in right now. That was built in this was built in 1924, and it was called the Temple Center, and it was built by the temple community for a religious school, which is wonderful because that's what we hear in the hallway right now, for the religious school, for a library, which we see right across the way, and for social events. And their intention of the founders of this, of the people who orchestrated this, this building, was that it should be not just a place for events and social life for temple members, but for the whole Seattle Jewish community. They really saw themselves as the center of all of Seattle's Jewish community. And that just says a lot about where Temple was and where this community was, because this was where the active civic leaders of Seattle were finding their religious and social homes. And this is the building that was built in 1960 that we all know and love up the street, around the corner, that's being renovated. Right there, that's the corner? Okay, there it is. And then this is all that's left, as we know, it's right there out whichever direction it is. This building that original building was torn down in 1993. And these are the remnants of what's there. And I can't talk about Temple's history without mentioning Sam Goldfarb, because of course, Aunt Jackie, if you're here, Jackie Friedlander married Alvin Goldfarb, and this was Alvin's father, Sam, and he was the music director here for a long time. And we called him Grandpa Sam, even though he wasn't our grandfather, but my cousin's grandfather. And my aunt tells this wonderful story that she and my mom would come. Well, my mom was in junior choir, Betty Lou Friedlander. She was in junior choir, and her parents would make her take her younger sister, Jackie, with her, even though Jackie wasn't old enough to be in the choir yet. And every Saturday, my mom would come, and Mr. Goldfarb would say, "Leave your little sister at home. Don't bring your little sister." And Jackie kept coming, and she's like, "I got him. I married his son." So that's Mr. Goldfarb, but he was obviously a very important figure in Seattle's, in the temple world and in Seattle's Jewish community, and certainly in my family. Yes?
Back to the temple that was torn down in 1993, I remember it was a religious school we were building with Dad with and had chainsaw on there. But it was much smaller than the synagogue that was built in 1960.
Mm-hmm.
The synagogue they built in 1960 was too big, and so that's why they built the annex. Why didn't they just continue using the old synagogue for when the attendance was great? They could, yeah, I mean, if it was still standing, they could still be using it today if they renovated it, because it's just about the right size for what we need for services today.
The question is, why didn't Temple keep the old building and use it for additional services or an extra space for services? That is a question maybe for Rabbi Kate that she could answer at the end. Don't know. No idea. This is for it was, earthquake damage. Okay, well, maybe that's why. Maybe it was earthquake damage. Okay. Yeah, there are probably real reasons why they tore it down, but I do not know. Thank you for the question. So that's Sam Goldfarb. But this is a picture. So I put this picture here. I'm going to show it again later. This is a fabulous picture, but I just wanted to show on the right side, that's Jackie and Alvin Goldfarb. So that's one of Sam's sons, Alvin, who married Jackie Friedlander. And that's my grandfather, Jack, with his first two grandchildren, and his mom, Belle Singerman, now Friedlander. And that is Anne Friedlander on the far left. But I wanted to show this picture to prove that Jackie and Alvin got married. Or at least they were, because they were married. That's their daughter on the right-hand side. So the Jews of Temple were well off by this time, and certainly Paul Singerman was doing great. And in those days, I'm talking about before Temple was built, a lot of the wealthier Jews and the wealthier members of Seattle's community lived up on what was then called Yesler Hill. So if you go up Yesler and where it crests, where it's now kind of Yesler Terrace area, that's where there were a lot of these old aristocratic Victorian homes. And that's where the Yeslers lived. And a lot of the German Jewish community that was already well established lived up there on that hill. But when Temple was built, a lot of people moved here to this area, to the Capitol Hill area. Of course, part of it was the redlining. Jews were only allowed to live in certain areas, including Capitol Hill and the Central District. And you know, I tried to explain redlining in the book. It wasn't a government policy; it's a private policy. Banking and covenants and deeds is really the two things that made it impossible for a Jewish person or person of any minority to buy property outside of this, and it's literally red-lined area. There's maps with lines that show where these minorities can live. It's shocking when you actually see it. But the Singermans ended up moving to Capitol Hill, and this is their second home on Capitol Hill, which is now, they built it in 1905, and it is now the Gaslight Inn. And Joelle, who's right here with us today, lives there and runs the Gaslight Inn with her husband, Ryan. And it is gorgeous. Like, if you need any message from Paul and Jenny about the fact that they made it, they came here as immigrants, not speaking English, with not a dime in their pockets, and they built this freaking house in 1905. It's gorgeous. 15th and Howell. Yeah. Their first house on Capitol Hill was 16th and Denny, so really just a block and a half from there. But this was the house they built in 1905, and it's gorgeous. And a couple years ago, Shlomo and I, my spouse, decided to take one of the rooms for my birthday, and we slept in the room that was Paul and Jenny's master bedroom. And of course, you knew it was the master bedroom because it had a beautiful bedroom and then a beautiful sitting room with a fireplace and stained glass windows. It's gorgeous. Anyway, it was so fun to be in that space and do it. I've also talked twice to the Capitol Hill Historical Society in the home, thanks to Joelle and Ryan opening up their beautiful space. So I had the opportunity with my mom to go and visit, with Joelle and Ryan being our hosts. They gave us a whole tour. And my mom was, as I mentioned, very close with her grandmother, Belle. And Belle lived in this house when she was like 21 to 23 years old. So it was really a very, very special thing to do. So Jenny died, though, in 1907. They'd only been in this house for 2 years, and they sold it just a couple months before she died. My speculation, even though there's others who speculate differently, is that they sold the house and moved out because she was ill, and they just couldn't handle the house anymore, even though they had maids and servants and no. That's my guess of what happened. But soon after Jenny died, her 3 kids all got married. The one on the right is Isidore. He marries this woman. It's from the newspaper, so it's very grainy, but it's wonderful to have even this. Gertrude Stern from New York. She was from a very wealthy German Jewish family in New York, and they got married and moved back to Seattle. And he went into business with his father, Paul. And after Paul died, he took over the business and basically ran it into the ground, sadly. And the business was no more. By 1923, the business was gone. And then this is Louis Friedlander, who marries Belle Singerman. They're my great-grandparents. And then this is Anne Friedlander. Like, I'm showing you this picture again because there's Belle, but there's also Anne on the left. So the 2 Friedlander children there's too many Lewises. I'm really sorry. So it's very confusing. And my brother's named Louis, so it's just too many Lewises. But this is crazy. Louis Friedlander, there's 2 Friedlander kids, Louis and Anne. There's, let's just say, Isidore's already married. So there's 2 Singerman kids left, Belle and Louis. Belle marries Louis Friedlander, and Anne marries Louis Singerman. And they get married in 1909 in a ceremony, double ceremony, officiated by Rabbi Koch, the rabbi here, very obviously very well-known and famous rabbi of Temple de Hirsch for years. And the 2 couples get married in a double wedding ceremony. This is crazy. I never heard about this. I never knew that I knew Anne, Auntie Anne. She lived to be very old. She lived in West Seattle. We used to go visit with my mom. I remember her. She used to go every day into the water, into Puget Sound. Winter, summer, whatever. We all know even in the summer, the water's freezing. She used to put on this little bathing cap and march into the water and then march back out. And we were like, what? Anyway, she was a really, this gave me an opportunity to really learn a lot about Anne Friedlander, which was fascinating. Her marriage with Louis bore no children and did not last. They got divorced in 1917. But the marriage that lasted, that bore children, was Belle and Louis. And that had my grandfather, Jack, who's there with his grandchildren, and his brother, Paul, named for Paul Singerman. So this is Belle with her 6 great-grandchildren at the time in my house on Mercer Island. And that's me, the cute little one in the back left with the buttons on the dress. That's me. I'm about 6, I'm imagining. And the floor is my brother, Louis. And then the little guy next to me is my brother, Ken. And on the other side are the Goldfarb children. We were very close with the Goldfarb. My mom and Jackie are very close sisters. We lived very close to each other on Mercer Island. And that was Susan on the floor, and Stephen Goldfarb and David Goldfarb. So it's just a great picture. Thank you, I agree. But so here's the Friedlanders. So remember, Louis, this is Sam and Augusta. Look at that picture of Augusta. In my journey of trying to find it's in the book. You can read it in the book, the miracle of how I found this picture. I was dreaming of finding a picture of Augusta, but I could never have dreamed that this is what she looked like. I mean, look at that woman. Whoa, man. You don't mess with her. So Sam and Augusta got married at the age of 16 and 17 in Latvia. And her parents, the Bornsteins, gave them for their wedding gift tickets on a steamer across the ocean to New York. And they never saw them again. You can just imagine giving that as a wedding gift, saying goodbye to your 16-year-old daughter, and knowing you're never going to see them again, or presuming you will never see them again. That's what happened. They started out in Rochester because they had family there. Then they made their way to Ohio, and then it's a whole great story of how they ended up in Seattle, but they end up in Seattle in 1906. And this is their son, Louis, who I mentioned before. He is born in Rochester. Both the kids are born in Rochester, but really, he's a teenager by the time he gets here, but he goes to finishes high school, goes to university, then he joins his father in the jewelry business. And the Friedlanders become a very well-known jewelry business here in Seattle. And this is the house on 15th. Here we are, also on 15th, down more towards Volunteer Park, 709 15th. This is the house that Paul Singerman, so Belle's dad, built for this new couple when they got married in 1909. And it's a gorgeous house. It's not quite as gorgeous as the Gaslight Inn, but it's very similar and it's beautiful. So I'm just not shy. I just knock on the door and say, hey, tell them the story and ask if I can come in. And almost always they say, of course, I mean, not almost always they have said, of course you can come in. Anyway, it's fabulous. So, but I took my mom and my aunt here, and they lived here because after their parents, Jack and Elizabeth, got married, they lived in this house for a number of years before they moved to Magnolia, where my mom and my aunt grew up most of their growing up time. But the house is still there, which is fantastic. This is Friedlander's second store, but it was an amazing. This is from Mohi. Mohi Archives and University of Washington Archives were fabulous sources. And this is their second store, and I'll tell you where it is. Second and University, but I'm going to help you visualize. Think Benaroya Hall. So this is now part of Benaroya Hall. It's the, let me just think for a second, the northeast corner of 2nd and University. So it's that corner of Benaroya Hall. So that's what's there now. But this was their second store, and in 1915, you really get a sense of what it looked like. And then by 1928, they moved to the store that maybe many of you in the room had been to before it closed on 5th and Pike. And this is Sam and Louis and Jack and Paul standing in front of Friedlander & Sons, 1928, their brand new, gorgeous, marble-fronted store that was just magnificent in and out. It's the store that I remember very, very well. Growing up there, I worked there as a teenager. I told my grandfather that when I graduate college, I'll come back and help run the business. And he said, women can't run a business. So that was the end of that idea. But they all grew up in Temple was their religious and social home. And this is that I'm just going to shift to the Stadekers because Victor Stadeker came from Germany, so he's part of this young man. He came at 18 by himself, never saw his family again. Actually, he brought over a bunch of his siblings. He had 9 siblings, and a bunch of them he brought over either earlier or certainly when Hitler came to power, he brought a number of the other ones over to Seattle. Some of them lived in Aberdeen, Texas, different places. But Victor was the oldest of the family of 10. And this is the woman in the middle of the picture on the left is the woman he married, Ada Bonner, who was a millinery specialist. He opened up a millinery shop. And she answered an ad and came to Seattle to work for him. And they ended up getting married and had 4 children. And the girl with the bow on her head there is my grandmother, Elizabeth Stadeker, became Friedlander. So Victor, after living in New York for a while, traveled across the country to Portland because he had a friend there from the old country, from Germany, who taught him the millinery business. He had a millinery business down there. And I did a whole bunch of research about Portland's Jewish community and about this guy in particular. I learned a whole bunch. I was in Portland a couple weeks ago, and I told this whole story of this guy. People loved it. I'm not telling his story here today, but it's super fun. But this is his first shop up in Seattle. So this gentleman who helped him down in Portland financed him. So they went into partnership, and he came up and opened up his own millinery shop. That means making hats. And he made hats. This was down on Western Avenue. The National Building, which is still there, it was a brand new building in 1905. And he had the first floor of it. But then, 5 years later, his business grew so dramatically that he moved to this brand new building on Fifth Avenue between Pike and Union. So if you can visualize that street, that was kind of like the Wild West of the Wild West in Seattle. And my uncle says, in 1910, it was a wooden street. It wasn't even a real street. But it became, these 3 families that I'm talking about really defined Seattle's retail and wholesale business and defined and shaped where Seattle's downtown was and became, because they saw the future of where Seattle was moving. Paul moved his stores to various places, understanding where the market of people were going to be and the customers. And I think that Victor understood that Seattle was the Pike Place Market had opened in 1907. So Pike Street was becoming the street in Seattle. And that's why you have Friedlanders 18 years later opening up their store in 5th and Pike, which is a little funny because then their children marry each other. But okay, but the families had something to do with that. This is Elizabeth as a grown woman with my mom, Betty Lou Friedlander. That's so cute. That's a gorgeous picture, right? Mom, you look great. And this is Betty Lou and Jackie as children. So, like I said, they lived first at 709 15th, and then they moved to Magnolia, which my mom did not like, living in Magnolia, because all of her friends were here on Capitol Hill, where this was their social world. And but they're gorgeous. And this is Jackie and Betty Lou when we went a few years ago to the Stadeker home. So the Stadekers, with their millinery business, also became extremely wealthy. And they bought this amazing mansion down in Denny Blaine. And again, I took my mom and my aunt, and we knocked on the door and said, "Hey, can we come in?" Because their parents got married in that house, and they let us in, and we looked around, and it was fabulous. And so, and my uncle lived in this house, and it really shows you what was going on with. Sorry, I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but this is what people called it: Temple Jews. That's what even the Temple Jews called themselves, the Temple Jews. The Temple Jews in the 1920s and 30s. And my uncle, William Stadeker, so my grandmother's twin brother, said, and I put it in my book, so I'm just going to read it from here, like, he's now talking about the 1920s. Okay, so this is the era where they were living in this house. Those days, explains Uncle William, in the early 20s and 30s were rather affluent. He talked like this, rather affluent times for the community of Jewish people. They all seemed to be doing well. They enjoyed parties. Now, mind you, these are the Temple Jews. This is not referring to the much more newly arrived Eastern European Orthodox group that was, maybe not doing quite as well as they were. Just a brief glance at Seattle's Jewish Transcript social page makes it clear that Seattle's temple Jews of the 1920s and 1930s loved parties. It was constant entertaining. Dinners, concerts, lunches, teas, birthdays, anniversaries, visitors from out of town, any excuse for a party. And my mother, he says, was a good party giver. She knew how to do everything beautifully. Her tables, this is in this house, her tables were always talked about. The way she entertained was outstanding. We had a beautiful home in Denny Blaine, about 20 rooms, okay, 20 rooms, on Lake Washington Boulevard. It was an easy house to entertain in because it was so large. So you get the idea of what's going on with this group of Jews. They're doing well. This is the Jewish Transcript, which was an amazing source of information for me. Started in 1924, and this is really where you can see what's going on. So of course you can, now that it's digitized, and I want to thank the Transcript for doing that, you can put in a name and find, everything about that family. So I put in the names and also Temple de Hirsch, and I found a whole bunch of entries that were related to my family. So in May 1924, there's a whole bunch. Victor Stataker is confirmed at Temple. It's all on the social page, okay? So visualize, this was the Facebook of the time, friends. If you had something going on, it went in the Transcript. A ball was held in the new Temple Center, that room right on the other side of that wall there. List of patrons and organizers included Mr. and Mrs. Victor Stataker. Elizabeth and William Stataker, in 1924, listed as members of Temple's children's choir. Mrs. Victor Stataker, Ada, women did not get their own names in this time. No women, you're always Mrs. Male somebody. The way it is. What? I don't know when it changed, but this era for sure not. She's listed as a member of the board's Temple's Ladies Auxiliary, which was quite remarkable because Ada wasn't Jewish. Ada was Protestant and did not convert before or after she married Victor. And she was, according to my uncle, very well received at Temple and very welcomed and was integrated into everything that went on here. Victor Stataker was vice president of Temple in 26 and later became the president. William Stataker was confirmed. You get the idea. The community chest, which was Seattle's very early federation, all the synagogues and organizations had a representative on the community chest, and they raised money and gave it out, like what Federation used to do. And Mr. Victor Stataker served as the executive committee representing Temple de Hirsch. So they were very active here. Now, this is a lot of fun. Temple had a Hanukkah dinner. They probably still do. But in 1928, here's what they said about it. A big event of the social season in the Seattle Jewish community is the dinner given by the Ladies Auxiliary of Temple de Hirsch. There was a short program with one outstanding act, Ladies of the Heyday. Lots of dancing and a wonderful dinner. Mr. Ben Rothberg opened the program while William Stataker, my uncle, announced each act in a clever way as a radio announcer, mentioning many families' business houses in burlesque terms as sponsoring the different acts. William Stataker and Ted Sternoff spoke comedy lines that went over well. What are you showing me?
When we hosted all these big dinners, they personalized the china. We still have it in the kitchen and use it.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Yeah, a lot of parties. And then the Friedlanders were mentioned a couple times, 29 and 33. My grandfather, Jack, who was definitely in the socialite group of Temple's youth, a musical act by the members of Sigma Alpha Mu fraternity was greatly enjoyed. Benny Goodman, B. Bernard, and Jack Friedlander showed their fine ability as musicians. Now, I never knew my grandfather to be a musician, so this is fascinating. His voice was not. Tonight at Temple de Hirsch, Jack Friedlander, prominent in Temple's young people circles, will speak from the pulpit on Mother's Day theme. Following a long-established custom, the Pi Tau Pi fraternity will pin a flower on every woman attending the service. It was just great fun. But I think it's also really important to, so Papa Jack was also, we called him Papa Jack. He was also president of Temple, as was his father. Like everybody, all the men in the family were all presidents of this temple at some point along the way. And I wanted to share this picture because this is my grandfather, Jack Friedlander, on the left side with Alvin Goldfarb. So Alvin, who married Jackie, joined Friedlander and Sons. He was a jeweler, and he worked at the downtown store. He managed the downtown store for many, many, many years. And then he went out on his own and started Alvin Goldfarb Jewelers in Bellevue, which I'm sure everybody knows. And then his son, Stephen, who's in that picture on the left, took over the store from Alvin. Sadly, the store, or sadly, I mean, I don't know if Stephen's sad about it, but I'm sad about the fact that the store is closing. But it just shows that, like, this Friedlander jewelry legacy carried on into my generation. And it's really a beautiful thing. And I love that picture of my grandfather with Alvin. Looks so good. Stephen looks good too, Jackie, don't worry. But I think it's important to note, and I want to make sure that this is stated very, very clearly. Even though these temple Jews were wealthy, living it up, having a good old time, there was still, they did it despite of the discrimination and anti-Semitism that was in Seattle and all over the United States. They were not welcomed in the non-Jewish social clubs. They started their own social club, Glendale Country Club, Country and Golf Club. And I asked my mom and my aunt, like, what did that feel like to have to have your own club? And they both were like, that's just the way it was. It's just, Bobby says you didn't notice, it was the way it was. You were with your friends and you had a great time.
You were friendly until they went off to their homes and you went off to yours.
They were friendly until then.
There was no animosity that I knew.
Oh, there was plenty of animosity, but you just didn't experience it.
In Madison Park, the tennis club,
Mm-hmm.
one day they said, well, what name are you using today to get in? Because you couldn't get
The tennis club, she lived in Madison Park, and what name are you faking today to get into the tennis club? Because you can't get in. What was your birth name? No, your last name. Meltzer, a Jewish name. Yeah, for sure.
because you couldn't say that because I wasn't a member. But they, well, you know, I walked in, I was there, we used to go swimming there, but we were never allowed to be members.
You were an imposter. Yes.
It says that UW had a quota. My grandfather, Ben Mason, graduated from UW in 1936.
Mm-hmm.
So they used to allow a certain number of Jews there.
Correct. Yes, your grandfather went to school there. My grandparents did too. My great grandparents. But there was a definite quota all over the country, and UW was one of them. It's documented.
My father's side of the Katz family was also there, and then you know, my grandparents were in the Jewish fraternities, either ZBT or A5.
Because they weren't allowed in the other ones.
My parents even in the 1960s.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. But many professions, even when my dad graduated from University of Washington Law School, he graduated as number one in his class. Then he went to NYU and got himself an LLM, an advanced degree in tax. 1959, there were 2 law firms of the many law firms in Seattle that would interview him. 2. He got a job at one, Bogle and Gates, but there were 2. That's remarkable because when I graduated law school in what year did I graduate? 88, and I wanted to come back to Seattle. Everybody, I interviewed with anybody I wanted. So it was very different. A lot of things changed, but there was so much discrimination in those times. And now I'm just going to introduce you to the other side. So starting around the end of the 1800s and around 1900, you have a shift of who's coming to America of Jews until 1924 when the gate closed for everybody, Jews and non-Jews alike, in terms of immigration. This are the Steinbergs, and this is my dad's maternal grandparents. They came in 1910, 1911 from a small shtetl, typical tiny, tiny, tiny place. And Linda's here. Her family is the Lawson family. They were also from the same shtetl and came to Seattle. A lot of people from those families came here to Seattle. And were very close, certainly in those early generations. But they settled in the Orthodox Jewish community, which is the Central District. They bought a house, remarkably, 10 years into their life here, bought a pretty decent-sized house on 28th and Washington. But he started out as a peddler and then opened up a retail store and then gradually developed into a few more retail stores and some wholesale stuff and whatever. They never reached the wealth of my mom's family, but they managed, but they started out really, really, really poor. And this is the Treigers, who ended up in Portland. They immigrated from also another teeny tiny shtetl, very religiously observant Jews, settled in Portland in the Jewish Orthodox immigrant neighborhood. It's called South Portland. And there's a whole bunch of information about it in the book. But I wanted to talk about, before I get into here's a picture of my grandparents who got married. Sam met Rose. Sam from Portland met Rose in Seattle, and they got married in 1928. But before we get there, I wanted to just talk about the settlement house, because this was the women, primarily the women of Temple, who set up the settlement house, the National Council of Jewish Women, which was the women from Temple. In some cities, it was called the neighborhood house. Here, it was called the settlement house. And this was what they built to help these new religiously observant, Yiddish-speaking Jews coming from Eastern Europe. Now, they helped them because it's what Jews do. We help each other. You came, you had no money, you had no language, you didn't know the culture, and they helped them. But they also helped them because they wanted to acculturate them and turn them into Americans as fast as possible, because they were terribly embarrassed about these new Yiddish-speaking religious Jews who were not American. And so there was a double situation. But this was a remarkable thing that the women of this community did. They raised the money to build this house, and NCJW was a national powerhouse phenomenon. And if you think the organizations were run by the men, some of the formal ones were, but everything was done by the women. And I want to share with you, because all the women on the Temple side of the family were involved in NCJW. And I want to read to you what I found this yearbook, 1927, 1928, NCJW, Seattle Chapter Yearbook. It's quite long. But in the beginning of the yearbook, they have the National NCJW Secretary's introduction. I'm going to read you just a little bit, because it tells you so much about what was going on then among these women. Her name was Estelle Sternberger. She had her own first name, 1928, but it was the women's put together the book. The council's vision is the vision of Jewish womanhood, keeping eternal watch over the body and soul of every Jewish mother and daughter. The vision of every Jewish woman playing a role of dignity and achievement in her community, her country, her faith, all in the comity of humanity. This is in the context of a long thing. I have the rest of it in a footnote, but I'm like, wow, that's fabulous. And the Seattle chapter, which all of these women on this side of the family were involved with, had so many clubs. They had, listen to this, this is early Temple life here. And this is what they did for these new Eastern European immigrants. It wasn't for themselves. They had their own stuff going on over here, parties and teas and things. This was for the new greeners. Dramatic club, mothers club, sports club, embroidery club. There was this is not even half of it, but a Bluebird group. Mrs. Alfred Shemansky was the head of the Bluebird group. And what? It was a Bluebird group. It was like Campfire Girls, but they instructed them in hygiene and behavior. It's like Brownies, the youngest set of. But it was, yes, and it was to instruct these girls on how to take a bath and put themselves together, so they don't look like those immigrants off the boat. That was really the reason. Yeah. There was a sewing school, a Sabbath school, 175 enrolled, English classes, and vocational scholarship given to needy Jewish students. So you just really get an idea of not only these two social worlds were completely separate. They did not socialize. The Orthodox community over in the Central District around Yesler Street, there was no. They were instructed on how to behave and how to become Americans, but they were not invited over. Oh no. So, but that is part of what is so remarkable about me standing here today. Yeah, Lynn's going, yeah, hell yeah, because after they get married, you have Betty Lou and Erwin who get married in 1957. Betty Lou from this grew up here in this world, wealthy German Jewish population, the Temple Jews. And my dad, who was born in his mom arrived here when she was 7. There was a family of 7 They were a big family that came. It wasn't the same story of the 16, 17-year-old boy leaving home and finding their way and making good. It was a family of 7 that came and resettled themselves. And the temple Jews did not want to have anything to do with the religious Jews. And it was mutual. The religious Jews were completely skeptical and fearful of those temple Jews. What religion are they practicing? Not mine. Who are they? I don't know. You stay there, we stay here, fine. But then these 2 young people meet at the University of Washington. They fall in love and they want to get married. Nobody wanted this marriage. Ain't nobody wanted this to happen. And my grandfather, who talks about the drama of this story in his 1975 interview with the Jewish Oral History Project, he makes himself out, of course, as the hero of the story. He's like, nobody wanted this. I'm the only one who supported Betty Lou. And my mom confirms that it is true. He is the only one who like calmed everything down and made it happen. But even on the day of their wedding, his mother, Belle, okay, so we've heard a lot about Belle. His mother, Belle, says to him, he says this in his interview, she says, "This is all your fault." Isn't that amazing? Anyway, Betty Lou and Irwin do great. And this is a picture of them later in life, obviously, with their dog Winston. And I don't know if anybody remembers Winston, but what I learned in the course of my work is that the values that I thought that I retained from my parents or sort of also made up myself, as we say in Yiddish, nechtigetug. These are values that come from this rich, deep history of immigrants who left their homes in Europe and came to this new world and made an entire life here and did well. Like, the only one that really never made it of the original immigrants, even Steinberg's, like he opened up a little shop and he bought a house, like he made it from in that level. And but the Treigers in Portland, the father never got beyond the peddler. But everybody else got beyond the peddler stage and succeeded. But certainly the next generation succeeded very well. If you look just as my dad as an example, he succeeded very well as in his profession and in his civic and Jewish life. Linda.
I just have to tell you that I remember your parents' wedding because it was the event. I mean, my parents.
Let's just have you on the microphone so you don't have to repeat.
Okay.
Thank you.
I wanted to tell Karen, I wanted to remind her that for my parents, that was like the event probably of the century. I mean, it was probably the most elaborate wedding that they were invited to in their lives. And it was a big deal. I can remember, you know, I mean, they were excited, but I imagine there was a lot of conversation going on about it.
Oh, I'm sure there was. And I'll just share with you before we get to your comment that when my parents talk about the wedding, it was a wedding at Paul and Marjorie Friedlander's house on the water, Lake Washington, right near I-90. That house isn't there anymore, something else there now. But it had a huge, huge lawn, so the wedding was on the lawn because the Friedlanders wouldn't have the wedding at Bikur Cholim, and the Treigers wouldn't have the wedding at Temple. So they had to have a place to have this wedding where East could meet West, and it was my uncle's garden. And not only that, there were 2 rabbis. They were like, okay, who's going to be the rabbi? So it was Rabbi Levine of Temple and Rabbi Appel of Bikur Cholim. There you go, Rabbi Appel. And my mom was furious. After all this, they're finally getting married, and Rabbi Appel was late. She was so mad. She's like, the rabbi was late. The story is, my dad said that he had a funeral that had to happen, so that's why he was late. Not saying it's whatever excuse it is. But in the meantime, all the guests are there, and people are like waiting for the wedding, and there's no wedding yet. And so my dad asked Shim Ellen, who was our cousin on the Lawson Steinberg side, who was an opera singer, to sing. And they got Sam Goldfarb, the music director from Temple, to play the piano. And so Sam Goldfarb's playing, and Shim is singing. So it's just this beautiful, beautiful mixture of cultures and societies that had hitherto been very separate. Sorry? They're all Jewish people. Yes, comment back here.
I think
Oh,
what
we're
we
talking
might need to do, I'm just going to give a call out to anybody who's online. I've been watching my inbox. I have a few things to pass
Okay,
on to
great.
you
Okay,
in terms
we'll-
of historical fact. But if you have questions, you can text me or email me. Karen is going to be here,
Here.
just outside the doors.
Yeah, I want to
'cause
recognize the time.
We're going to have a lot of kids come into this space for the end of Sunday school. But she's got her books.
Yes,
'cause
happy to
this is
sign them and sell them.
book number 2. And Karen is very generous with her time, and she has many gifts. So as you can tell, there are lots of stories to come with this, but also she's hosted me for Shabbos, like being in the Seward Park neighborhood. She's a founder, she said, of one synagogue, but Minyan or Hadash is a modern Orthodox synagogue that is very warm and welcoming, and I recommend people experience that too, because our borders can still feel rigid, and they're actually quite porous.
Thank goodness. Yeah, we're lucky about that. Well, I appreciate you all coming, and I'm open to questions and comments. The pen's not working.
I'll get
We'll
you a new
another
pen.
What I'm passing around, though, is just if you are interested in either this PowerPoint, I'm happy to send it to you if you want it, or I also do a weekly blog that is about Seattle's history, Seattle's Jewish history, my family history, Portland history. That's, I think, super fun. If you want to be on the list to get the blog, you can... I have your email, absolutely. But I wanted to just end by sharing with how I came to the title. The title of the book is called Standing on the Crack, The Legacy of 5 Jewish Families from Seattle's Vibrant Gilded Age. It's a mouthful. We can just call it Standing on the Crack. But that phrase comes from my grandfather, Jack Freelander, and it encompasses really all those values and feelings that I gathered as I was doing this work. Because my grandfather, in his jewelry store, you would walk in, and there was a marble floor, and right in front of the watch counter, which was the first thing you would see, was a crack in the marble floor. Like a crack, like was a crack there. And my grandfather used to stand on the crack to welcome people as they came in. And he used to say, he talked like this, he used to say, you can't sell anything from the back room, you gotta stand on the crack. So, but what that phrase became in our families, became a joke, obviously. Standing on the crack became a joke, but it really embodied this value of welcoming the people into your space, into your life. Whoever that might be that walks through that door, you're gonna treat them with honor and dignity and respect. And it really became sort of a mantra of like the epitome of all the values that were passed down to me and to our generation of the family. And so so that's why I think that the title is just perfect. So thank you. Yes?
This idea of like standing on the crack is just, things crack, and yet it also shows resilience by standing on the crack.
There you go. It also shows resilience by standing on the crack. I appreciate that. I just wanted to show this picture of our family from 2010. Betty Lou and Irwin had 3 kids, and it turned into this by 2010. And then this is my family, which is growing quickly and beautifully. So this is from last Passover. So it's really wonderful. This is just my sub-family. That's Betty Lou. Shlomo, and the Elisheva's right there, married to Judah. And then Shoshana's on the far left with Alma in her belly, on the far right, I mean. She has Alma. Alma's now alive inside her uterus there. And that's Micha. They live in Israel. And then on the left of me is Esther, who's now in social work school in New York. And then Jack and his family. Jack's our child who lives here in Seattle, yay, with his 3 children and the new baby, Solly. And so we have 1 in Seattle with 3 kids here, 1 in St. Louis with 3 kids, and Shoshana and Micha in Israel with their baby, Alma, and Esther in New York. So that's our family. Yeah. Yeah. We pass it on, as they say. Cool. Happy to sell books.